Hi, everyone. Okay, so in this first guided project, we're going to be creating a database that's going to help an organization that's trying to store its club members. So you'll be taking screenshots of this as you go. I'm going to be guiding through you how to do this in this first video. But when you're doing it, you'll go ahead and do screenshots yourself and upload them into the assignment. So to get started, I've opened up a DB browser for SQLite on my machine. We have another video explaining how to do that, so refer to that one for that information. I'm going to create a new database, and we're going to call this database Club Members. And you'll see here there are several different file types that you can use for databases. I'm going to use .db just for consistency's sake, but if you use .SQLite or .SQLite 3, all of those are okay. So I'm going to save it .db as instructed. I'm going to save it to my desktop just so I have that in there, and you'll see I'll hit save here. So as soon as I do that, it's going to prompt me to create my first object in the database. That first object in our case is going to be a members table. So we want a list of all the people who are a member of this club. So we'll say member or members. And we want to think about what do we want to capture about the members in our club. So we have 8 fields that you'll see in the instructions that are helpful for doing this. And I'll explain why each one is the type it is. So the first is we need a unique identifier. We talked a little bit about primary keys. In this case, that's going to be a member ID. When I title it, I'm using kind of a standard convention of no spaces and doing an uppercase letter for each new word. In this case with ID, I have 2 capital letters in that second part. That member ID is going to be a number. It's going to ultimately be an integer value. And it's going to be a primary key. So you'll see if we check off PK, it added a row in our little SQL preview that says it's the primary key. That primary key is member ID. So we're going to add a couple more, and that's going to include first name, which is going to be text. We're going to add last name, which is also text. We are going to add in an address, and that's going to be text. We are going to add a city, which is also text. And then we're going to add a state, which is also text. And we're going to add a zip code. In this case, it can be an integer. And we're going to assume that we want the 5 code one. You can put some masks around it to limit that, but we're not going to for the simplicity of this project. So I'll say integer. And then we'll have email address. And that also is going to be text in this case. So I now have my 8 fields in there, and I'm ready to create my object. So I'm going to go to OK. Okay. So now if I want to add objects to that database, I can go to modify table. It's going to tell me that I have to save. I recommend just saving periodically. It's just helpful practice. So just do Command S whenever that comes up, or Control S on Windows. So now we're going to go modify the table, or rather, we're going to go to Browse Data. Made a brief mistake there. And Browse Data is kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. It's going to be a view where we can insert new objects. To do so, if I press and long hold this button, you'll see I have an option for new record. And when I do that, it automatically assigns the member ID as 1. That's totally fine. And we're able to go through there. I'm going to add the first person in, who is Margaret Jepson. And I'm just tabbing between the fields in order to go to the next one. And Margaret lives at 28861 Newcastle Road. That's in Fair Oaks, California. And her 5-digit zip is 95628. And her email address is Margaret at sac.rr.com. Okay, so now we have one record. I'm going to pause for a moment and queue up some of the next step, and then we'll come back and do that together. Okay, next we're going to import our additional records in. I realized I made one mistake. In that the instructions of adding the fields, I forgot to add a cell phone number field. So I have an additional table header here where I have all the cell phones stored, and we can go back and update the first record as well. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to add one last field for a cell phone number. That is going to be text as well because it's not an integer value. So we're going to change that to text, and we're going to hit OK. So now if I look over, there is a cell phone field. Okay, so how do we add all of these new records in? What would we do in that case? So here I have open an Excel document, and in that Excel document, I have all of the additional records, and those records are all set up and pre-structured. I'll explain this in a moment. So this top part is more like a spreadsheet that we would be familiar with that you might have to organize this in a tabular form. So we have those same fields that we just created, and we have that for several people. I messed up the member's ID in this top section and fixed it down below. So you'll notice in that last part of the video, I actually had Margaret was 1, and these actually were all in the wrong order. So there we go. Now it should be matching up in both spots. So I can't just import or copy and paste this into DB browser this way. You can do an import CSV to create a table anew, but you can't do that to like update the information. So we have to use SQL as the way to do this. So you'll see down below, starting at line 13, I have some text I've pasted in that is the instructions for how to do this. So we're going to use what's called an insert into command in SQL. And what this statement here is saying, we're going to insert into the members table object that we've just created these fields in that object. So member ID, first name, last, address, city, state, zip code, email address, and cell phone, additional values. So it knows now at this point to expect values that we're going to tell it. And in a textual form, we've manipulated this data up top to now be in a form that SQL will understand. So each row is going to contain a parentheses. That parentheses will have each field broken up with the field data being there, comma, the thing, comma, so on and so forth. If it's numeric, it can just be a number. And you'll see I actually goofed with that with the zip code, but it should still work because it knows it's a number value. But if it's a textual string, you have to use either a single or a double quote to contain that information. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this information with the exception of Margaret, who we've already added in, and we're going to copy these values and put it into our SQL query. So now up top, you'll see I can now delete that out. So when I execute this, it'll bring all of these data into our spreadsheet, into our database. So I'm going to hit run, and you'll see down below in my little log file, tells me execution finished without error. That's great. I'm going to hit save by just doing Command S, Control S in Windows, and I'm going to go back to browse my data. And now you'll see here I have all that data except for Margaret's. I could do this in SQL. I'm not going to do it in SQL, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to just paste in Margaret's cell phone data now that I have that. So you'll see that's now in there. So that is how you would do that in SQL. And that's how you would add new records in. That concludes the project. I'm going to show you one other thing just as bonus material, just for you to be able to know how to do this in the future. So if I go into execute SQL, if I want to see what I had just done, I can go and do what's called a select query. So I'm going to do select, and I can hit tab to accept the auto pieces. And I want to select all from the table members. And when I run that, you'll see this is me asking my database for all of the things denoted by this asterisk as a wildcard that just says gives me everything. I'm not going to filter it or limit it in any way. So I can see all that data is in there, and it went in correctly. So you've now successfully added something into SQL.